The story. So let us bless. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Holy One, for giving us the mitzvah of learning and living words of Torah. So Mikeitz time, after 2 years, we find a Joseph who is still kind of dwindling away in prison. And suddenly, Pharaoh starts having these strange dreams, which we're not going to look at. So if you came expecting interpretation of dreams, sorry to disappoint. I sort of made an assumption that at some point in your Torah study career, you've talked about the dreams, right? The 7 fat cows getting eaten by the 7 skinny cows. The 7 fat ears of corn getting eaten by the 7 skinny, gaunt ears of corn. And Pharaoh brings it, and Pharaoh's cupbearer says to Pharaoh, hey, I met this great guy in jail. He's actually a pretty decent dream interpreter. His name is Joseph. Maybe talk to him. So Pharaoh brings in Joseph. Joseph is a pretty smart guy. He's a good dream interpreter, but I would also argue he's a good businessman. He understands how to take advantage of an opportune moment, and not only interprets Pharaoh the meaning of Pharaoh's dream, but also is sure to insert himself into the planning and preparations in order to execute his interpretation of what Pharaoh's dream means, which is that the 7 fat cows and the 7 full ears of corn represent 7 years of plenty and abundance, followed by 7 skinny cows and 7 parched ears of corn, 7 years of famine that strike not only Egypt, but as we understand from the text of the Torah, there's a famine across the Middle East. And really, because of Joseph's fortuitous planning and preparation, that he helps the Egyptian government secure, they're able to not only plan for this, but ride through these 7 years of famine to the point that Egypt becomes a focal point of the ancient Near East during this time of famine, because they're the only ones not only with enough food for their people, but also enough that they can potentially share with others as well. So that's the moment that I want to pick up on, is actually the moment in which Joseph's brothers, really Jacob, their father, sends Joseph's brothers to Egypt in the midst of this famine to secure food. Now, keep in mind, at this point, Joseph is essentially the vizier to Pharaoh. He's risen up to a place of prominence in Pharaoh's court and in the Egyptian government. And he's also, over the course of the 7 years of plenty in particular, he really not only rises up in the Egyptian system, but essentially becomes fairly Egyptian. He doesn't lose his Israelite identity completely, but in many ways, he takes on many of the auspices of Egyptian society. The dress, the shaving, probably the makeup. He has an Egyptian wife, Asenath, and has children that he gives Egyptian names to as well. So it's worth noting that in the moment where his brothers re-encounter him, when it says in the text they don't recognize him, it's not just like it's been a while. He's changed dramatically as well. So to kind of set this up, Leon Cass, the great biblical scholar and literary scholar as well, talks about this idea. He says the Egyptian story of Joseph and his brothers, he calls a drama in 3 acts. By and large, Joseph is the producer and director of the drama, as well as its leading actor. So what we're going to look at is the first act, which really is precipitated by the famine. And it's worth noting just a little bit of historical context about it, or biblical context, I should say, about the role of Egypt and famine. If you look back in the story, it's worth noting that Abraham goes to Egypt during a famine in search of food. And famine also started Isaac towards Egypt. But Isaac's journey, like so many things with Isaac, is interrupted by God. He ends up settling in Gerar on his way to Egypt, though. So it's worth noting that the other patriarchs also spend important and significant time in Egypt due to famine. So it's interesting that here we have Jacob, who, according to Cass, he says, Jacob unwittingly starts the process that will bring him and his people into Egypt as a separate people for 400 years. So, with that as kind of our setup, let us dive in. Maybe? Wait for it. There it is. Okay. Somebody want to read for us? Jane, great.
The 7 years of abundance that the land of Egypt enjoyed came to an end, and the 7 years of famine set in, just as Joseph had foretold. There was famine in all lands, but throughout the land of Egypt there was bread. And when all the land of Egypt felt the hunger, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph. Whatever he tells you, you shall do." Accordingly, when the famine became severe in the land of Egypt, Joseph laid open all that was within and rationed out grain to the Egyptians. The famine, however, spread over the whole world. So all the world came to Joseph in Egypt to procure rations, for the famine had become severe throughout the world.
So so I just wanted to give you a little bit of the background before Jacob's sons, or Joseph's brothers, depending on how you look at them. And it's interesting to note the text refers to them in different ways as well. But interesting to note the rise to power that Joseph really sees, right? Here we see Pharaoh deferring to Joseph in the matter of this famine. Right? A little bit of just a glimpse into just how powerful Joseph has become, and also showing, right, that the famine is both incredibly severe, but also that Egypt has enough that the whole world is coming to Egypt to glean from their resources. I found this really interesting take. It's a little bit long. I hope you'll bear with me, but I think it's an interesting way of setting how we think about both Joseph and how he relates to his family in particular. This is from this wonderful work called Torah Queries, which is a queer look at the weekly Torah portion. So here, I'll read this for you. Mikeitz is part 2 of the continuing story of the boy who is different. As Greg Drinkwater demonstrates in his essay on Parshat Vayeshev, Joseph is a child with a decidedly queer set of sensibilities. He dreams of things bowing over for him and wears technicolor robes, not fitting into the rough and tumble sphere of his many brothers. He instead arouses their jealousy and their ire. Like many boys who are different, he is treated brutally by his own siblings and cast out from his home and his family. Alone in the world, he becomes a slave, is pursued for sex, and ends up in jail for no good reason. That is where our Parsha Mikeitz begins. Joseph is in prison, guilty of nothing but his own desirableness. But his freedom is near. Pharaoh is plagued by dreams, and Joseph is the only one who can interpret them. As a reward for his unique insights, he is made vizier, Pharaoh's right-hand man. He becomes suddenly and urgently the new savior precisely because of who he is and what he understands from his differing perspective. The entire nation will owe its survival to the boy who is different. Yet Joseph's transcendence is unconsummated and incomplete. Still needed is the reconciliation with his brothers and father. In the flow of the Torah narrative, this reunion is necessary to explain the presence of Jacob's family and later the Israelites in Egypt. It is also essential for the emotional and psychological closure of the story overall. The reconciliation of family members is often akin to accepting and embracing parts of oneself and one's own history. So this begs the question, from whom is the reconciliation between Joseph and his family most necessary? We can say that it is Joseph. Perhaps he secretly pines for his lost family. However, it is still true that he is a ruler of Egypt, rich, powerful, already well married, blessed by God, needed and loved by all. On the other hand, perhaps in and outside the narrative, it is Joseph's family that is literally starving. They had a child with a special sight in their midst, and they cast him out. In doing so, they brutalized their own possibilities and excised a necessary part of themselves. Now they are starving, not so much because they sinned and thus deserve to starve, but rather in the way of what happens after you surgically remove an integral part of yourself. So a really powerful setting for actually what I want to spend the bulk of our time this morning thinking about, which is the sort of the beginning of the reconnection and eventual reuniting of Joseph and his family. But I think it's a really powerful way of framing this sort of moment of coming back together. Elaine, you've got your hand up. I wasn't sure if that was to read or if you had a question or comment.
No, and thank you for that, because that's a lovely draft. But I was thinking about the words that it says the people cried out to Pharaoh, which sounds like the people crying out to God, and the very different response of God bringing manna to the people and bringing food to them directly, and Pharaoh says, "Not me. Go talk to him.
Right.
He'll help you." So it's a real contrast between the Jewish experience and the relationship between God directly, and Pharaoh saying, I can't, go talk to him. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that's a really
It's the same phrase they cried out to,
yeah.
right? I mean, I don't know if the Hebrew is the exact same, but it's that reflection.
Vayitzak ha'am el paro. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because we see God hearing the people's cry also at the beginning of the Exodus narrative. Yeah, Jeff. Yeah.
I guess what's troubling me is the fact that after this, it leads to 400 years of slavery.
Yep.
And that's, this is a nice story, but the outcome, I know we had to get to across the Passover story, etc., but it does lead to 400 years of slavery.
And there's a recognition of that, certainly. And look, I mean, if you look at the Torah as a collective, what do four of the five books talk about? The Exodus, right? It's the story of how the Israelites get from this place of slavery and oppression to, it doesn't end with them reaching the promised land, but they're certainly free and about to enter the promised land by the end of Deuteronomy. But it seems like the Joseph story really is the pivotal story that kind of gets us from the sort of proto-history of the world and sort of monotheism, like proto-Judaism. Because Abraham, we say Abraham's the first Jew, and sure, according to Jewish tradition, there's truth in that, but he's not exactly Jewish. He's just a monotheist, right? Different, separate from the other folks in the ancient Near East. He's certainly the spark of monotheism that eventually becomes Judaism. But Joseph is really the story that gets us kind of from our patriarchs and the land of Canaan into where most of the action takes place, which is Egypt. And I think it does it also in a way, they don't go down to Egypt. The Israelites aren't in Egypt in a place of depravity. They really actually are, they're a separate people, as Cass says, but they have a place of prominence, right? They come because of Joseph's place in Egyptian society. And it's worth noting there's sort of this fall from grace that seems to happen over the course of, a couple of generations, where the next, a couple of pharaohs later doesn't remember this story of Joseph and all that Joseph did. I mean, especially looking at this story, how much, all that I did for you. It's pretty shocking almost that Joseph is forgotten. Rena, go ahead.
The other thing that I wanted to point out is the whole centrality of family in the story. And I think that we sometimes forget that the whole, besides, the story of our relationship to God, and our prayers are about our relationship to God. There is this whole thing about God sort of giving up on everybody at the beginning and choosing Abraham and Sarah. And it's the story of a family. And I think that that's one of our main strengths as the Jewish people, is that we have struggled with family. And apparently the people, around, it wasn't just that the people worship many gods, they did not really respect family. And there was a lot of licentiousness as part of their rituals and things like that. And I think that we personally know that the family is such an important aspect of our life as Jews.
Yeah, it's a really interesting framing also, because especially if you think about the book of Genesis, where family dynamics are so complex. But for the most part, there are, especially as we get further into the story, we see these complex, especially this story that we're going to look at, these complex, convoluted family relationships that actually do manage to reach, in some instances, some resolution. And so it's sort of perhaps one of the messages of Genesis is, even when families disagree, even when families fight, even, with all the drama that plays out, eventually, family matters, and you invest in family, and if you really are invested in family, you can find a way to make it through. And certainly, this story is one instance of that playing out. And I also don't want to overly rose color, Cain does kill Abel, so there's not exactly reconciliation with that family. And even though Jacob and Esau seem to reconcile, I don't want to diminish what Jacob takes from Esau. So it's not, I don't want to oversimplify, but I think there is this sense of the importance, to your point, the importance of family. Yeah, Joanne.
And I think that carries forward to where we are now. I hadn't thought about this before, but I just came back from Israel, but even we just feel like family. It's like the Jewish people are one big family.
Yeah.
That grew from all of this.
Right. This idea of Am Yisrael, the people of Israel. It's not just tonight, right? It's different than a religion. It's different. We're certainly not a race, right? Or even an ethnicity, right? We don't really kind of fit into these Western categories of how you distinguish people. We're connected as this kind of eternal global family of people, right? And you can join the family, right? You can convert in. You can't ever leave. It's kind of like Hotel California. But right. So yeah, it's a really lovely idea. Okay, so let's look actually at the journey that Joseph's brothers go through, and also the journey that Joseph goes through as they kind of come back together. Okay, so we're at chapter 42, verse 1. Somebody want to read for me? Elaine, great.
When Jacob saw that there were food rations to be had in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you keep looking at one another? Now I hear," he went on, "that there are rations to be had in Egypt. Go down and procure rations for us there, that we may live and not die. So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to get grain rations in Egypt. For Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, since he feared that he might meet with disaster. Thus the sons of Israel were among those who came to procure rations, for the famine extended to the land of Canaan.
I love this image of Jacob looking at his sons and saying, like, why are you looking at each other? Like, get off your butts and go do something about it. So this is kind of setting the scene, and again, a little bit of foreshadowing here, right? If you're familiar with the story, you kind of know how the Benjamin piece plays out. It plays an important role. It's worth noting who Benjamin is. It's mentioned here in the text. The way that it's phrased, it's not your brother Benjamin. It's Joseph's brother Benjamin. Right? Because Benjamin is Joseph's only full brother, right? The only other son born to Rachel. Rachel dies in childbirth, actually, giving birth to Benjamin. But it's an interesting framing that Jacob seems to see this opportunity in Egypt, sends the brothers, holds back Benjamin, clearly traumatized, and it's worth noting that Jacob perhaps suspected that something in the story that the brothers had told all these years before about what happened to Joseph wasn't true. Perhaps he's suspect that these 10 other brothers did something nefarious to their brother Joseph. And again, this reference to Joseph's brother. All right, Barbara, yeah.
Barbara Orlowski, Shabbat Shalom. So to me, I see a different interpretation of when they say Joseph's brothers Benjamin. So this is somewhat a functional and dysfunctional family, but and
like every family.
like every family, but it doesn't start with the brothers. Look, it starts with Jacob, because Jacob isn't saying with your brother Benjamin, so he's already treating all these half siblings as if some of them are full families, some of them aren't, because it's Joseph's brothers Benjamin, as opposed to the 12 of them are not the Brady Bunch, mixed in with. I guess they wouldn't be because they're half siblings, but it's coming from Jacob, who had it coming from Rebecca on the way that the siblings are. So there's already, family is looked at differently, and it's not the let's all get along, we're all one big family. It's your brother, Jacob.
Well, to be clear,
Benjamin.
that's the narrator speaking, right? Jacob doesn't say anything about Joseph's brother Benjamin. It's the anonymous narrator. 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to get grain, for Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin. But it's clear though that
There's tension.
there's certainly tension. Okay, so let's keep going. So they travel down. Yeah, Jeff.
I was going to say it also shows, this father keeps one son back because of danger and lets all the other sons go.
Yeah, that's worth noting. But right, so again, right, even after whatever happened with Joseph has played out, it's like he still hasn't quite learned the lesson of you can't show favoritism to the one. Even if you have a favorite, you can't tell the other ones that this one, I'm worried something might happen to this one in particular. Even if he doesn't say it explicitly, Barbara, to your point, he's doing it in his actions. Okay, so now they travel down. We again, lest you've forgotten since 5 verses before who Joseph is and what's happened with him. Somebody want to read for us in verse 6 here? Great, Jeff, go for it.
Now Joseph was the vizier of the land, It was he who dispensed rations to all the people of the land. Joseph's brothers came and bowed low to him with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he acted like a stranger toward them and spoke harshly to them. He asked them, where do you come from? Where do you come from? And they said, from the land of Canaan to procure food. Go on, keep going.
Keep going.
For though Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Recalling the dreams he had dreamed about them, Joseph said to them, you are spies. You have come to see the land in its nakedness.
All right, so I want to pause there. This Cass calls the second act of this drama that's playing out. Joseph's Egyptian stage directing, says Cass, will reach its greatest virtuosity, while amongst the sons of Israel a new leader will emerge, successfully displaying his political virtue. Even Jacob, albeit without much enthusiasm, will be forced to acknowledge Judah's superior wisdom and to begin to accept him as his heir apparent. We see that play out in a little bit. So here's kind of part two, is where the brothers actually are before Joseph, and what's the first thing that they do? They come and bow down to him. And what was Joseph's dream when he was a little pipsqueak? Yeah, that his brothers would bow down to him. So here it is, playing out pretty much just as Joseph had imagined. And then we have this interesting play on the root naker. So when Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them. So vayaki reim, but he acted like a stranger. So it's interesting. It's vayit naker, which is the same root, right? That both to recognize and act like a stranger are both from the same root. And he spoke harshly to them. So clearly we see in this moment, Joseph is the one with all the power in this dynamic. Because the brothers don't know who they're dealing with. They're at the will of this vizier of Egypt. And Joseph knows exactly who these guys are. There are many commentaries that actually point out that, like, it's not just the brothers that are coming for a private audience with Joseph, but that in the midst of this big room full of people, right, because all the world is coming to ask for food, Joseph sort of sees his brothers and recognizes them and pulls them towards him, and then kind of singles them out to mess with them. Because he knows exactly who they are, right? They kind of like pop up in the midst of this room. So this root is connected to the idea of to be able to recognize or acknowledge or discern. But the second use of it, vayit naker, it's hitpa'el, a reflexive verb. So it's to make oneself known, which he, right, so he doesn't do this. In verse 7, lost my place. Yeah. So it's interesting. He acted unrecognizable to them. So it's this interesting moment of both seeing and not seeing that also seem to indicate a certain power here. Cass again asks this question: why does recognition, to again make familiar, give rise to estrangement? It did not do so in Judah's case earlier, when Judah was compelled by Tamar in chapter 39 to recognize his staff and signet. He understood through them the deeper truth about family life and his ties to his brothers. And Cass quotes another biblical scholar, Robert Sachs, I don't think connected to Jonathan. Joseph is now somewhat in the same position in which Judah had been in chapter 38. He has found a new life for himself and has no intention of returning to his brothers. Unlike Judah, his recognition will not cause him to return immediately. In his case, relations will become much more complicated. And clearly, we see here in this recognition and acting like a stranger, that Joseph's kind of trying to figure out here how to respond. Yeah, Ellen. Where's the microphone? Here, pass it all the way.
I'm trying to grapple with this, Ellen Taffin, with this disconnect. In his first dream when he was a youth, it resulted in punishment and banishment. And in his second dream, that he dared to dream again and tell people of his dream, not fearing that he would be punished again or maybe impaled or put to death. But he was willing to take that risk. So somehow he had enough confidence at that point that his dream would be of benefit to others.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? Like what is going on early on in the Joseph story with his first willingness and then sort of insistence almost on sharing this dream? Because remember, the first dream, it's just the brothers that are bowing to him. The second dream, his father and mother are bowing to him as well. And that really seems to be the dream that kind of not only enrages his brother, but even Jacob says to him, like, lo, you would imagine me, your father, bowing down to you. So it's interesting to think about, kind of a blend of courage, of perhaps recognition of the importance of sharing whatever it is that he's seeing, of kind of the fortuitousness of this, and probably a certain measure of chutzpah that Joseph has as well. Or maybe one could argue a little bit of a lack of self-awareness or self-perception in understanding that sharing with the people whom you're dreaming will be bowing down to you, that they will be bowing down to you, might not in fact be a good idea. So it's an interesting question about what is going on with Joseph. We don't really see the inner workings of his mind or his personality, but it's an interesting question. All right, let's come up. We'll go from one Ellen to the next. Mi Ellen la Ellen, as they say.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom. Ellen Ratner. The bowing down and the needing for people to bow down reminds me of certain politicians in Washington today. They need that adoration. They need you to be on your knees and bow down. I think this might be the first recorded of this need, but it proceeds in many different generations.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, certainly. Yeah, Harv. Not sure where to go with it, but yeah, sure.
This probably has nothing to do with Joseph.
Great.
But I see the entire 5 books as a theatrical piece with a lot of vignettes on leaving from a place, going away, and this applies to the entire group, going away, mixing up with other people, and a lot of family vignettes of family action in between. So they go away and they finally return to where they want to be.
Yeah.
And one of the things that strikes me is throughout all this, who we are today is a heritage of a mixed bag of people. Not just, we're not all offspring of Judah.
Right.
Throughout the Torah, there's always talk of a mixed bag of people that went here, there, married the other one.
Right.
So and I think what really needs to be studied is the individual vignettes of family life and what it means. Now, in particular here, Joseph has very little to do with who we are today. He's not one of the fathers, even in the Torah.
Right.
His sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, are of mixed heritage, and they don't even come down the line of history. So it's a very complex thing, and I think the whole thing is a vignette of family life, and each different family gets a spotlight put on them, and this is what happens when you do this, and this is how you get out of it.
Yeah, and on some level, I mean, I think each of these vignettes, look, part of it is that our biblical characters are all so flawed and so deeply human. So I think, like, on the one hand, like, you could argue the Torah is elements of the Torah are trying to teach, like, moral and ethical lessons through sort of demonstrating the complexity of these family dynamics. But also, I think they're in part teaching straight up, like, how to navigate complex family dynamics when you've got a bunch of complex personalities smushed together and trying to figure stuff out, and things go poorly and things get better and there's reconciliation and there's coming apart. But yeah, I think that's a great way of thinking about it. It's not just the arc of a people, but it's the arc of all these smaller systems of people within that bigger community. Because I think there's a recognition that if all of those family structures fall apart, there is no big community as well, right? That there's kind of the give and take of both what's going on in your individual family unit and also how that plays out in the broader context of the community. All right, I want to move us along here. Elaine, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if this word in 7, stranger, is similar to the word about this stranger that Jacob wrestles with. And also, it's interesting that it says Joseph acted like a stranger to them because, in a way, he's always been the stranger. Oh wait, I mean his family. He was sort of the stranger, and just like the drosh that you read, that he was different. And he's different in Egypt because he's not really Egyptian, and he seems like he's always a stranger.
Yeah, I mean,
But specifically about that word stranger, is that similar to what's used with his father, who now has a stranger for a son? When he wrestles with this Ish, is that at all related?
I don't think so. I don't know. I'd have to check. It's an interesting question. I mean, this seems to be, Dahlia, do you recall, or Rabbi? It's not the same word. I didn't think so, because this really seems to be about, oh, thank you. This seems to be about, like, this play on the way in which they recognize and how they're seeing each other. I think that in the Jacob wrestling story, it's a different. It's Ish, right? Ish. It's just an unknown man. Right, which is just sort of an unknown, unnamed man. Okay, so David.
Thanks. I just want to offer this translation from Everett Fox of this line, where he says, Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended no recognition, this is hyphenated word, of them. So yeah, I don't think that he sees it being related at all.
Right, but certainly Joseph's seeing of his brothers versus what his brothers, right? Yeah, but he pretended no right. He treated that he recognizes them, but he's pretending that he doesn't. But he's pretending that he doesn't. Yeah, Dahlia, hold on. Where's the microphone? Oh, pass it.
דליה, בוקר טוב, שבת שלום וחג שמח. I just want to put a little footnote, ויקירם ויתנכר. So Yoel and I talked about it right away because it comes from the same root and still it means the opposite and it also used in the language that way. So ויקירם relate to להכיר, to know.
Right.
I recognize you, I know you, etc., etc. But the same root also have the word ניכר. ניכר, ישבנו בארצות ניכר. We lived in countries away from Israel, mainly the diaspora. So ארץ ניכר is a place that we don't know, that we are נוכרי, that we are stranger. So what I want to, the bottom line is that the same root in the language itself is very intimately connected and have two opposite meanings.
Yep.
To know and to be stranger. Anyway, I thought I should share.
Right, so it's an interesting play that you know, I think it shows the complexity and the, I don't know, like there's an intentionality here with what Joseph is doing. And then not only does he pretend that he doesn't, you know, like, oh, yes, what do you want? People I don't know. But then he's really pushing them, right? He immediately then accuses them of being spies. And it's unclear if he's toying with them, right? If he's playing some sort of game, or in this moment, the first thing that he's acting on is just that sense of trauma and hurt from what they had done to him. And we don't actually see what Joseph's thinking. You know, the only insight here is actually in this word, right? That he recognizes them, but he's pretending that he doesn't. So there's clearly something intentional that he's doing here. But in terms of this accusation, we don't actually see Joseph's thought process until the very end of, you know, when everything is reconciled and he reveals himself. But it seems like there's some sort of emotional shift that happens at the end of the story that perhaps he wasn't necessarily planning to reveal who he was and actually attempt that reconciliation. I don't know. It's a little unclear.
Maybe ויתנכר, it means that he played their game. They don't recognize him, so for this moment, externally, he played their game, like he also don't know them, and give him some space to the inner work that has to happen to him until the reconciliation.
Perhaps. So we're going to go a little bit further and see how this first meeting plays out. Because keep in mind, this is a first meeting. And then Joseph sends them away with food in the end, holding back one brother. And then eventually they come back with Benjamin. So let's see. Elaine, do you want to read for us?
Sure. Where are we?
Chapter 42, verse 10.
But they said to him, "No, my lord, truly, your servants have come to procure food. We are all of us sons of the same man. We are being honest. Your servants have never been spies." And he said to them, "No, you have come to see the land in its nakedness." And they replied, "We, your servants, were 12 brothers, sons of a certain man in the land of Canaan. The youngest, however, is now with our father, and one is no more." But Joseph said to them, "It is just as I have told you. You are spies. By this you shall be put to the test. Unless your youngest brother comes here, by Pharaoh you shall not depart from this place. Let one of you go and bring your brother, while the rest of you remain confined, that your words may be put to the test, whether there is truth in you. Else by Pharaoh you are nothing but spies." And he confined them in the guardhouse for 3 days. On the third day Joseph said to them, "Do this and you shall live, for I fear God. If you are being honest, let one of your brothers be held in your place of detention, while the rest of you go, and take home rations for your starving households. But you must bring me your youngest brother, that your words may be verified and that you may not die." And they did accordingly. They said to one another, "Alas, we are being punished on account of our brother, because we looked on at his anguish, yet paid no heed as he pleaded with us. That is why this distress has come upon us." Then Reuben spoke up and said to them, "Did I not tell you? Do no wrong to this boy, but you paid no heed. Now comes the reckoning for his blood." They did not know that Joseph understood, for there was an interpreter between him and them. He turned away from them and wept. But he came back to them and spoke to them, and he took Simeon from among them and had him bound before their eyes. Then Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, return each one's money to his sack, and give them provisions for their journey. And this was done for them. So they loaded their asses with the rations and departed from there.
So it's Joshua.
So sort of in line with Harv's earlier comment, I see two parallel tracks propelling this story. There is the human scenario, and they're contrivances to propel the story along. And then there is God's plan, which Joseph himself acknowledges towards the end of this parasha, or maybe it's the beginning of the next one, where he tells his brothers, "You did no wrong,
Like God put me in here.
because you got me here, and that was God's plan." And so, I think this is wonderfully rich literature in how these situations are contrived. Of course, he's going to seek revenge, and so all this is natural human behavior from one perspective, and the way he does it. Well, we know he's very clever, and so that's how I see it. And I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Joshua Seeger.
Thank you, Joshua. And also, so not only is Joseph recognizing them, but there's this clearly what has happened to Joseph all these years later is still weighing on his brothers. Right? Alas, we are being punished on account of our brother because we looked on at his anguish, yet paid no heed as he pleaded with us. That is why this distress has come upon us. Reuben spoke up and said to them, "Did I not tell you? Don't do it." So it's fascinating that the plight of the brothers in this moment isn't necessarily connected in any way, shape, or form to what happened with Joseph. I mean, part of this is, Joshua, as you said, it's good literature, right? So of course the Torah is going to make the connection between, what happened and where they are right now and who they're having this conversation in front of. But perhaps this is the beginning of the first crack of Joseph softening, or perhaps a shift in his plan for what he's going to do with these brothers. Right? He ends up sending them back not only with the food that they request. Right? He holds Simeon back, but sends them back with bags full of grain and also gives them their money back. To the point that when they get back to Canaan and open up their bags, and Jacob sees not only bags full of grain, but that they've gotten their money back, Jacob is worried that they're going to be perceived as thieves, and tells them they need to go back to reconcile with the vizier of Egypt, in part perhaps because he's worried about the name that these sons are going to make for themselves as thieves, right? That somehow they managed to end up leaving Egypt not only with the resources that they needed, but also with all of their money. They didn't buy it. It's almost an echo back to the cave of Machpelah, right? They didn't buy it. They were somehow gifted it, and that is not the perception that Jacob wants for his family. And there's this whole back and forth between the brothers and Jacob saying, look, we can't go back unless we've got Benjamin with us. And Jacob is understandably incredibly hesitant to let another youngest, clearly favored son go off alone with these murderous brothers. And eventually they convince him. And in part it's because Judah himself becomes the guarantor of Benjamin's well-being. And it's worth noting that this is, that as the story plays out, we won't see the reconciliation in this week's Torah portion. It really happens next week. But eventually, Judah convinces Jacob to let Benjamin go back with them, and in a wonderful calypso number, convinces Joseph not to take Benjamin, right? Because when they go back, shush, is it me? No. When they go back, Joseph then gives Simeon back and says, I'm going to take Benjamin. And finally, Judah steps up in that moment and says, take me instead, because it would destroy our father if Benjamin doesn't come back. And that seems to be the moment that unlocks something deep within Joseph, or perhaps that he's been planning all along. Doesn't seem like it, though, where Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, and there's this moment of reconciliation. But it's worth noting that it's Judah stepping up and saying first to Jacob, I will ensure my brother's safety. And so maybe that's part of the shift in the brothers' behavior also that allows for the moment of reconciliation to take place. So a powerful story. It goes on next week as well. With that, we've reached the end of our time. Yeah, Steve? Last. Here, can somebody pass the mic back?
Shabbat Shalom, y'all. Steve. So there are a couple of hints here that no one's taking. Well, the first one is that Joseph says, my God. Mm-hmm. Well, this is Egypt, guys. There's no my God. There's many gods. Ray, and, there's gazillion gods, dozens and dozens. Why my God all of a sudden? And he's using the name, I think he uses the name of God there. So that should hit them in the face. It really should, and they don't get it. And then the second hint, the big one to me, is, of course, when they're arguing in front of him in their language, and he understands it, and he turns away. He gets it. So to me, that was another a hint they should have, been caught up with. But instead, they're again so into themselves that they don't see these very, to me, now obvious. Of course, it's obvious after you read it for the 20th time.
Right, sure.
But I mean, it seems obvious now when you read it for the 20th time that there are the hints here, like breadcrumbs, mm-hmm. And including why is he asking for Benjamin? Benjamin is his only brother of his mother, full brother,
and also probably the only brother not complicit in his being sold into slavery.
Oh, absolutely.
He was probably too young at the time.
Absolutely. So,
right.
hint. So all these hints that no one's picking up on.
Right, and it's interesting, right? It's unclear whether he's asking for Benjamin so that they can reunite, and then and he's taking, perhaps his original plan is, I'll rescue my brother Benjamin. And these guys can go off and do whatever back in famine, but I'll take care of my brother Benjamin. So it's unclear exactly where he's going.
And maybe he's starting to think, well, maybe they're getting it finally. But it's Reuben again who said it, and Reuben said it in the first time.
Right. All right. So let us rise for Kaddish D'Rabbanan. Let the glory of God be extolled. Let God's great name be hallowed in the world whose creation God willed. May God's sovereignty soon prevail in our own day, our own lives, and the life of all Israel. And let us say Amen. Let God's great name be blessed forever and ever. Let the name of the Holy One of blessing be glorified, exalted, and honored, though God is beyond all the praises, songs, and adorations that we can utter. And let us say Amen. God of heaven and earth, grant abundant peace to our people and their leaders, to our teachers and their disciples, and to all who engage in the study of Torah everywhere. Let there be for them and for us all, in compassion, a joyful life, sustenance, and the hope of your sovereignty. And let us say, Amen. For us, for all Israel, and for all humanity, may the blessing of peace and the promise of life come true. And let us say, Amen. May the one who causes peace to reign in the high heavens, let peace descend on us, on all Israel, and all the world. And let us say, Amen. Amen, amen. Shabbat shalom.